Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shattered Hearts Tales. Morning light slipped through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the five-star hotel suite, casting a soft golden glow over a scene built on secrecy and lies. The city below was just waking up, unaware of the betrayal unfolding high above it. The room smelled faintly of expensive perfume and last night's indulgence. Silk sheets were tangled around two bodies, champagne flutes sat half-empty on the glass table, and a designer jacket lay carelessly thrown over a chair. The billionaire stirred first. For a brief second, he smiled, stretching comfortably before reality settled in. Beside him, his mistress slept peacefully, her manicured hand resting possessively on his chest, as if she belonged there. This wasn't the first time, and in his mind, it wouldn't be the last. To him, this hotel room was an escape, far from responsibility, far from consequences. The mistress opened her eyes and smirked when she noticed him watching her. She leaned closer, tracing his shoulder lazily. "Relax," she said in a low, confident voice. "Your wife will never leave you. Women like her never do." He didn't argue. Instead, he reached for his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up instantly, revealing several missed calls and unread messages. All from his wife. Pregnant. Alone. Probably worried. Probably waiting. For a split second, something close to guilt flickered in his chest, but it vanished just as quickly. He told himself she was dramatic. Emotional. Dependent. Where would she go? What would she do without him? With a dismissive sigh, he turned the phone face down. "I'll deal with it later," he muttered, more to himself than to the woman beside him. In his world, problems were solved with money, apologies, or time. And he had plenty of all three. The mistress smiled, satisfied, pulling him back into the warmth of the bed. Outside, the city moved on as usual. Inside, he felt untouchable, powerful, certain that everything was under control. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that this very morning, while he lay wrapped in betrayal and arrogance, the life he had built so carefully was already beginning to collapse. By the time he arrived at his luxury mansion, the billionaire had already rehearsed his excuses. The familiar lines played smoothly in his head: meetings ran late, investors needed attention, business never sleeps. Lies had become second nature to him, polished and effortless, just like everything else in his life. He adjusted his tie before stepping out of the car, wearing the confidence of a man who believed nothing could truly threaten him. The front doors opened, and he walked inside expecting the usual signs of home. Soft music should have been playing in the background. A staff member should have greeted him politely. The faint smell of fresh coffee or breakfast should have lingered in the air. Instead, there was silence. Deep, unsettling silence. He paused, listening. Nothing. The marble floors echoed under his footsteps as he moved further inside. No voices. No laughter. No sound of the television his wife usually kept on during the mornings. Even the house staff was nowhere to be seen. For the first time, the mansion felt strangely empty, almost hollow, as if it no longer recognized him. An uneasy chill crept up his spine. The temperature felt colder than usual, but it wasn't the air that bothered him, it was the absence. This place, once filled with warmth and routine, now felt unfamiliar, distant. Like a house waiting to reveal a secret. He loosened his tie, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She's probably being dramatic again, he thought. Sulking. Trying to make a point. That was how he always explained her silence away. Still, something felt off. The comfort he usually felt here didn't come. Instead, there was a quiet tension hanging in every corner, pressing down on him. Though he refused to admit it, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a warning. This wasn't just another argument waiting to happen. Something had already changed, and he was about to find out what it was. The memories came to her in quiet moments, usually when she was alone. Most days, she attended her prenatal appointments by herself, sitting in sterile waiting rooms filled with couples holding hands and whispering excitedly. She smiled politely when nurses asked where her husband was, offering practiced excuses that felt heavier each time she said them. Work was busy. Meetings ran late. He would come next time. He always promised that. Lying on the examination bed, she would place a gentle hand over her growing belly, feeling the soft, reassuring movements of the baby inside her. Those small kicks became her comfort. In those moments, she realized she wasn't truly alone. She spoke quietly to her unborn child, promising protection, honesty, and a love that would never disappear. The bond she formed with her baby grew stronger with every passing day, filling the emotional space her husband had slowly abandoned. At home, his absence became routine. Late nights turned into overnight business trips. Conversations became brief, distracted, and empty. He was physically present only in photographs and social media posts. Emotionally, he was already gone. She replayed memories of their earlier years, searching desperately for reassurance that she was imagining things. Then, one evening, everything shifted. While scrolling absent-mindedly through social media, she noticed something that made her heart stop. A familiar watch on another woman's wrist. A hotel location tagged carelessly. A reflection in a mirror that showed a man who looked exactly like her husband. At first, she convinced herself it was coincidence. Wealthy men all wore similar watches, she told herself. Her hands trembled as she closed the app. But the signs kept appearing. Patterns formed. Denial slowly gave way to a truth that hurt more than she ever expected. The nights she cried alone became longer. The baby's movements felt like reminders to stay strong, not to break. One night, as she sat quietly in the dark, she finally accepted what her heart already knew. She couldn't raise a child in a home built on lies. Her baby deserved more than a father who disappeared when honesty was required. The next morning, with shaking hands but steady resolve, she contacted a lawyer. Each document she reviewed felt painful yet empowering. Preparing the divorce papers wasn't about revenge, it was about choosing dignity, safety, and a future where her child would grow up seeing strength instead of betrayal. The moment he stepped into the living room, the tension hit him like a physical weight. The familiar space, the leather couches, polished hardwood floors, the grand chandelier, felt different, charged with an unfamiliar intensity. And there she was, his pregnant wife, seated calmly on the sofa, her posture composed, her gaze steady. In her hands, neatly stacked and deliberate, were the divorce papers. For a heartbeat, he froze, the rehearsed lies that had carried him through countless situations failing him completely. What is this?" he stammered, disbelief and irritation threading his voice. He stepped closer, trying to mask the panic rising beneath his surface. "This has to be some kind of joke. You're overreacting." She didn't flinch. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and trust, now radiated clarity and quiet fury. The calm in her voice was far more terrifying than anger could have been. "I'm not overreacting," she said softly, her hand tightening slightly around the papers. "I've been patient. I've endured your lies, your absences, your betrayals. I've endured your choice to destroy the trust between us." His brows furrowed. "Wait, what are you saying?" His words wavered, betraying the first crack in his confidence. "I've provided for you, for the baby. I've given everything." "Everything," she interrupted, her tone firm but controlled. "Everything you've given me doesn't count for a thing when the foundation is built on deceit." "You were in bed with her," she said, deliberately naming the mistress. "While I was home, pregnant, believing in the man I married. You chose her over me, over us, over your unborn child." He stumbled back, the words hitting harder than anything she could have thrown physically. He opened his mouth to argue, to deny, but no lie came out that could undo the truth already etched in her calm demeanor. She reached forward and placed the divorce papers squarely on the coffee table, her movements precise, almost ceremonial. Not a tremor of anger, not a single tear, only the steady rhythm of someone reclaiming control over their life. "You can read them," she said softly, "or you can ignore them, but it doesn't change what's done. I've chosen a path that protects our child, and I will not let your betrayal define our family." She sat back, eyes unwavering, the silence afterward more punishing than any shouting match could have been. He looked at her, at the papers, at the empty confidence in her expression, and realized for the first time that the man he had thought he was, the one in control, untouchable, was standing on ground that was already slipping away beneath him. The living room, once a place of comfort and pride, had transformed into a courtroom where he was both defendant and witness to his own undoing. The billionaire stared at the divorce papers on the table, his eyes narrowing as disbelief quickly shifted to irritation. "This is ridiculous," he began, his voice measured but dripping with condescension. "You're letting your hormones control you. Pregnant women, emotional, irrational. I've told you before." He leaned forward, attempting to dominate the conversation, but she didn't flinch. He tried the familiar tactic of gaslighting, his tone smooth and practiced. "You're imagining things. I've been working late, stressed. You're reading too much into nothing. You always do this, turn a small misunderstanding into drama." His words were meant to weaken her, to make her second-guess herself, to doubt her own perception of reality. When she didn't respond, he softened his voice, shifting tactics to subtle manipulation. "Look, I can change. I can do better. I'll make time for you. I'll make this right. You know I've always cared about you." His eyes pleaded, carefully curated, like a performance designed to reel her back in. Yet there was no remorse, no real acknowledgement of the betrayal. It was all about preserving control. But she had anticipated this. Calmly, she reached into the folder she had brought and laid out proof on the polished table. First, the hotel receipts showing his stay with the other woman. Then, a chain of text messages, some accidentally revealing, some openly flirty. A time-stamped photograph captured him in a moment of intimacy that she would never forget. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow. His face, once so confident and untouchable, began to crumble. The arrogance that had always shielded him faltered, replaced by a flicker of fear he hadn't felt in years. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but she didn't let him finish. She had seen the truth with her own eyes, heard it in her gut, and now held it in black and white. His manipulations, the excuses, the blame-shifting, the empty promises, were powerless against the undeniable proof. For the first time, he realized that the rules had changed. She was no longer the vulnerable, dependent wife he could control. She had strength, clarity, and a plan. As he sank back into his chair, the weight of reality pressing down on him, he understood something crucial: his confidence, his power, and his charm were meaningless here. The woman in front of him was no longer someone who could be swayed by apologies or gaslighting. This confrontation wasn't just about divorce papers, it was the moment he truly lost control. The sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the tense silence like a knife. The billionaire froze, caught off guard. He hadn't expected anyone to come at this hour, certainly not her. He shot a glance at his wife, whose expression remained calm, almost serene. A few moments later, the door opened, and there she was, the mistress. Every inch of her exuded confidence, perfectly styled hair, designer heels clicking against the polished floor, a self-assured smirk playing on her lips. She stepped inside without hesitation, as though she owned the place, and her eyes immediately landed on the divorce papers spread across the table. Finally seeing the truth, she asked, voice low and provocative. "You know he loves me." Her gaze flicked toward her billionaire paramour, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The air became thick with tension. It was a face-off that seemed to stretch forever. The mistress's confidence, which had always been her weapon, met the unshakable calm of a woman who had endured betrayal but refused to crumble. The pregnant wife stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her hand resting lightly on her belly. She looked directly at the mistress, her eyes cold yet unwavering. "Love," she said softly, almost mockingly. "You call this love? Sneaking behind my back, lying, destroying a family? If this is love, I'd hate to see what hate looks like." The mistress's smirk faltered for a split second, the first crack in her armor. The billionaire shifted uncomfortably, his usual arrogance failing to hide his guilt. The wife continued, calm but cutting, "I hope you enjoy being someone's temporary thrill. But remember this, you will never replace what's real. What lasts? What matters? You are a shadow in a life you never built. And I am the future. The shift in power was undeniable. The mistress, once dominant, now seemed small and fragile in comparison to the poised, unshakable woman standing before her. The billionaire, once in control, realized he was witnessing the unraveling of everything he had taken for granted. In that charged silence, the dynamics were clear, the mistress's arrogance had no place here, and the pregnant wife, with her quiet strength, held the true power. The scales had tipped, and everyone in the room felt it. The room fell into an uneasy silence after the tense confrontation, broken only by the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The billionaire, still reeling from the evidence laid bare before him, looked at his wife with a mixture of disbelief and frustration. But she remained calm, seated gracefully, her hand lightly resting on her growing belly. "I think it's time you understand something," she said, her voice steady, deliberate. "I've always been prepared for this moment." He blinked, caught off guard. "Prepared," he repeated, a note of panic creeping into his tone. She reached into the folder she had brought and pulled out additional documents, legal papers he hadn't expected. "I activated all the necessary protections," she continued. "Our prenuptial agreement isn't just a formality. Every clause you thought you could ignore has been enforced. My future, and our child's, is secure." His confidence, which had been so unshakable just minutes ago, began to crumble. He scanned the documents, the reality sinking in. Assets he assumed he controlled were already accounted for, investments she had moved into her name, contingencies executed flawlessly. Every step he had counted on to maintain dominance had been anticipated, neutralized, and redirected. The mistress, standing awkwardly nearby, finally seemed to comprehend the truth. Her smug confidence wavered. For the first time, she realized she was nothing more than a temporary distraction, a fleeting moment of excitement in a life she could never claim as her own. The power she had wielded over him evaporated in the presence of the wife's composed authority. The wife's pregnancy, once perceived by him as a potential weakness or a reason to manipulate, now radiated strength. Every movement of her belly, every calm, unwavering gesture, reinforced her control over the situation. She was not fragile. She was not dependent. She was a force that had prepared, planned, and anticipated every betrayal, every excuse, every lie. The billionaire's arrogance had failed him, his mistress's illusions shattered, and the future, once a certainty in his favor, had slipped from his grasp. For the first time, he saw the magnitude of his mistake. She was not just surviving the betrayal, she was thriving in her strategy, her dignity, and her unwavering commitment to protect what truly mattered, herself and her child. In that quiet, commanding moment, it was unmistakably clear, the wife held all the cards, and nothing, not money, not charm, not deceit, could change that. The tension in the mansion reached its breaking point as the mistress finally took a step back, her confident facade faltering. She had come expecting to bask in the billionaire's power and affection, but what she faced instead was a woman who had outmaneuvered both of them. The realization hit her like a cold wave, she was nothing more than a temporary thrill, a fleeting shadow in a life she could never own. Without a word, she turned on her heel, the clicking of her heels echoing through the empty halls as she walked away. The door closed behind her, leaving silence in its wake, a silence filled with the gravity of consequences. The billionaire stood frozen, watching the only person who had validated his ego leave him voluntarily. He finally realized he had lost control over everything he had once assumed was untouchable. Desperation replaced arrogance. "Wait," he called, his voice cracking for the first time. He fell to his knees, hands trembling as he reached out to his wife. "Please, forgive me. I can fix this. I will fix this." His eyes glistened with unshed tears, a stark contrast to the composed, unshakable figure in front of him. He added a final plea, hoping to sway her, "Think of our child, our unborn baby. Don't throw away everything for anger. I need another chance." But she didn't respond. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. It was her shield and her sword, a reminder that she was no longer a pawn to be manipulated. Every breath, every calm glance, reaffirmed that she had already made her decision. She was strong, independent, and unafraid of the future she would now face alone. He remained on the floor, kneeling in humiliation, as the truth sank in. The mansion, once a fortress of wealth, pride, and control, felt cold and empty. He was alone, stripped of power, abandoned by the mistress, and rejected by the wife who had once been the center of his carefully curated world. For the first time, he understood that money, charm, and influence could not protect him from the consequences of his own actions. Karma had arrived, and it was merciless. The empire he thought unshakable had crumbled, leaving him with nothing but silence and regret. The room was still, the air heavy with finality. The pregnant wife reached for the pen on the table, her hand steady despite the storm of emotions that had passed through the morning. Each signature she placed on the divorce papers felt like a release, a reclaiming of her life, and a silent declaration that she would no longer be defined by the betrayal she had endured. With the final stroke, the legal bonds that had once tied her to a man unworthy of trust were severed. She exhaled, a quiet, controlled breath, and glanced at the pile of documents before her. The act of signing them was not revenge, it was empowerment. She had prepared, she had fought, and now she had taken her future into her own hands. Every fear, every tear, every sleepless night had led to this moment of undeniable strength. Next, she took back her maiden name, a symbol of reclaiming her identity and the life she deserved. It was more than just a name, it was her declaration that she was no longer the woman who had been silenced by lies or diminished by deception. Her independence was absolute, and it extended to the life growing inside her, a child who would witness honesty, strength, and unwavering dignity from their very first breath. She rose from her seat, her silhouette commanding and resolute. Her hand rested gently on her belly as she walked toward the door, each step measured, deliberate, and imbued with confidence. She did not glance back. She did not waver. She moved forward with the certainty of someone who had been tested and had emerged victorious. Behind her, the billionaire remained frozen in the center of the opulent living room, surrounded by the trappings of luxury that no longer offered comfort or power. The house, once a fortress of control, now echoed with emptiness. Every expensive chair, every ornate decoration, every shimmering chandelier reminded him of what he had lost, not through chance, but through his own arrogance, betrayal, and failure. As she closed the door behind her, a quiet, unwavering thought formed in her mind, one that would guide her life and the life of her child. My child will never grow up watching his mother beg a man who chose betrayal. And with that, she stepped into a future defined by strength, dignity, and the unshakable promise that nothing, no lies, no manipulation, no deceit, could ever take away again. The chapter had ended, but her story, and that of her child, was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shattered Hearts Tales.